Imagine a corporate auditor just showing up at your door at like 8 in the morning, demanding the hard drives of your soul.
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying image.
Right. I mean, no small talk, no, gentle inquiries about your well-being or anything, just a sterile conference room, a fluorescent light, and this massive ledger of your deepest hypocrisies.
Just right down to business.
Exactly. And, well, today's deep dive looks at a text that does exactly that. We are examining this really uncompromising, highly charged manifesto. It's titled The Final Wake-Up Call, and it's written by an author who just identifies as the Watcher of the Signs.
Yeah, and before we really get into the architecture of this document, I think we need to establish some parameters for how we're looking at this.
Oh, 100%. The impartiality disclaimer is crucial here.
Right, because this text is deeply theological. It's an explicitly Christian and, honestly, a potentially polarizing religious document.
Very polarizing.
So we are engaging with it strictly as neutral explorers.
Right.
Like, we are not endorsing its theology, we're not taking sides, and we are certainly not here to preach at you.
Yeah, our mission today is really just to dismantle the machinery of the text, right? To understand how it operates. We want to look at the historical context, the psychological weight of the arguments, and the rhetorical strategies the author deploys to basically strip away the reader's comfort.
And the foundational thesis of that machinery, it's this violent rejection of what the author calls sugar-coated theology.
Sugar-coated theology. I mean, that phrase alone sets the tone.
It really does. The Watcher is issuing this super aggressive mandate to abandon modern religious improvisation and return to the raw, unedited, physical scripture.
Which brings us to the core theme, the command echoing through literally every page of this manifesto. It is brutally simple. Stick to the script.
Stick to the script, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stop adapting it for modern sensibilities.
Exactly. Stop softening the blow, Just stick to the script. And the vocabulary the Watcher uses to enforce that mandate is, well, it's what makes this document so structurally jarring.
Right, because usually when you open a piece of pastoral writing, you're sort of culturally conditioned to expect agrarian metaphors.
Oh, totally. Shepherds, sheep, vineyards, the sowing of seeds.
Yeah, it implies a certain warmth, right? Like organic growth and nurturing.
But the Watcher just tosses all of that out the window. The text opens by calling for a forensic mandate and a forensic audit of the soul to expose spiritual malpractice.
It's so intense. We are immediately thrust into this punitive legal landscape.
Which is such a wild shift. I mean, why use such cold legal terms for something as deeply personal as spirituality?
Well, by utilizing that legal and forensic terminology, the author is deliberately stripping away the emotional padding that characterizes so much of modern Western spirituality.
Huh, emotional padding.
Yeah, think about it. In contemporary religious culture, theology is often framed as a therapeutic tool. It exists to facilitate personal growth, alleviate anxiety, offer a sense of belonging.
Right, it's very me-centric, like, how does this make me feel?
Exactly. The language is super subjective and heavily dependent on the emotional state of the practitioner. So if a pastor suggests the community is losing its way, a listener can just easily dismiss that by consulting their own emotional baseline.
Oh, I see. Like, if they feel generally happy and content, they just reject the critique. I feel fine, so we must be fine.
Precisely. But a forensic audit, that bypasses the emotional baseline entirely. You cannot argue your subjective feelings with a corporate auditor.
The numbers are the numbers.
Right. The ledger's objective.
It actually reminds me a lot of how the placebo effect operates in a medical context.
Ooh, that's a good comparison. How so?
Well, when a patient is given a sugar pill, but they're told it's this powerful painkiller, their brain actually releases dopamine and endogenous opioids, like they genuinely feel better.
Right, their perception of the pain goes down.
Exactly. Their emotional and physical perception decreases, but the underlying pathology, the tumor or the infection or the fracture, it remains completely untouched.
Wow. Yeah, that perfectly aligns with what the Watcher's doing here.
It's like the Watcher is acting as a rogue medical board, accusing the modern religious institution of spiritual malpractice because it's just mass-producing placebos.
Handing out dopamine hits wrapped in theological language.
Yes, making the patient feel deeply comforted while the underlying spiritual gangrene just continues to spread.
The placebo metaphor is spot on, but the Watcher actually takes the diagnosis even a step further. They aren't just saying the patient is untreated.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they are arguing the patient is actively intoxicated. Which brings us to the central diagnostic claim of the whole manifesto.
Okay, lay it on me.
The text categorizes the modern world, and specifically the institutional church, as suffering from a condition called UTOs.
UTOs. Okay. I assume that's an acronym.
It is. It stands for Under the Influence of Satan.
Wow. Okay. That immediately invokes the framework of a DUI, driving under the influence.
Exactly. And what's the most terrifying thing about a heavily intoxicated driver?
It's not just their lack of motor skills, right? It's their profound lack of self-awareness.
Bingo. Alcohol and narcotics alter the brain's risk assessment centers while artificially inflating confidence.
Oh, totally. A person driving under the influence will often insist, like aggressively insist, that they are perfectly capable of operating heavy machinery, even as they are literally swerving into oncoming traffic.
And that's exactly what the Watcher is saying about the modern church. It's like they're tapping on the glass of the car, shining a flashlight in their eyes and saying, you are fundamentally impaired, but your delusion is so deep you actually think you're driving straight.
That is a harsh diagnosis, but how does that even happen? Like, what is the specific mechanism of that impairment? How does an entire institution become intoxicated without realizing it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Watcher points to a structural shift. They claim the church has traded the fear of God for stadium marketing and financial windfalls.
Stadium marketing.
Wow. This is a critique of ambient conditioning. Intoxication in this context isn't like a sudden acute event. It's the slow, methodical corporatization of faith.
Right. When you start introducing multi-million-dollar budgets and light shows and brand management and audience retention metrics,
You fundamentally alter the psychological environment. The metric for success shifts from theological fidelity to consumer satisfaction.
but if the intoxication is that ambient, right, if it's just the slow creep of corporate metrics, how does the individual believer even recognize they are compromised?
Well, the text uses a phrase that I found really chilling to explain that. It calls it the strong delusion.
The strong delusion. That sounds apocalyptic.
It does. But the text argues this delusion isn't some future cinematic sci-fi event. It's the air we breathe right now.
It's already here.
Exactly. And the invisibility of the delusion is the core of its power. It relies heavily on the psychological principle of cognitive dissonance, or rather, the avoidance of it.
Okay, unpack that for me. How does cognitive dissonance play into stadium marketing?
So think about megachurch attendees, for instance. They are interacting with an ancient text that repeatedly centers on sacrifice, poverty, and severe persecution.
Right. Very heavy, demanding themes.
Yet, they are consuming that text in a multi-million-dollar arena that's designed for maximum sensory pleasure and emotional comfort.
Oh, I see. To reconcile the radical demands of the original script with the luxurious reality of the environment they're sitting in, that requires a massive psychological blind spot.
Exactly. The strong delusion is the cultural ether that allows a person to sit in a stadium, listen to a message about carrying an instrument of execution, which is what the cross was.
Yeah, a literal torture device.
Right. To hear about that and then leave feeling nothing but an ego-boosting dopamine rush.
That is wild to think about. And the Watcher views this not just as like a cultural faux pas, right?
No, not at all. They view it as a legal breach of the highest order.
Okay, but a diagnosis of that magnitude, accusing a global institution of a massive legal breach and profound intoxication, you can't just throw that out there. It requires an ironclad burden of proof.
Yes.
Like, in a courtroom, the prosecution cannot secure a conviction on rhetoric alone. They have to present the toxicology screen. They have to enter actual evidence into the record.
And this is where the mandate to stick to the script really governs the whole document. Because the evidence presented cannot just be sociological data or someone's cultural opinion.
It has to be the raw text itself.
Exactly. The author meticulously constructs this evidentiary record using a catalog of specific scriptural markers.
Okay, let's look at those markers, because they aren't presented as abstract moral lessons, are they?
No, they are deployed as forensic data points. The goal is to prove that the present moment perfectly matches the ancient diagnostic criteria for the last days.
All right, what's the first piece of evidence entered into the record?
It's a psychological profile drawn from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5.
Okay, I have that passage here. And the language is, well, it's an incredibly aggressive catalog of human pathology.
It really is. Read a bit of it.
So the text warns of perilous times where men will be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. It goes on to say they will be traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God.
Right.
I mean, it reads less like an ancient religious text and more like a brutally honest sociological critique of modern hyper-individualism. Like, it's describing selfie culture perfectly.
That's exactly how the author uses it. It operates as a precise mirror held up to contemporary Western culture. I mean, sociologists like Christopher Lasch have written extensively about the culture of narcissism.
Oh, yeah. The Culture of Narcissism. Great book.
It's a classic. He talks about how modern society has shifted away from communal obligation and survival and moved toward this relentless, almost neurotic pursuit of individual optimization and self-actualization.
Basically, obsession with the self.
Right. And the watcher takes this recognized sociological shift and frames it as the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old prophecy.
Lovers of their own selves.
Yes, that is the foundational pathology. And the argument is that from that specific root of narcissism, all the rest of the symptoms, the covetousness, the pride, the lack of natural affection, they inevitably bloom from that.
And the verse actually concludes with a phrase that serves as the linchpin for this entire spiritual malpractice charge. It says, they will be having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof.
That phrase is so crucial to the audit.
It perfectly captures the tension between aesthetics and mechanics, I think. A form of godliness, that's just the bumper sticker.
Branding.
Exactly. It's the bio on your social media profile. It's the architectural beauty of the cathedral or having the pristine audio mix of the worship band. It is the exoskeleton of religion.
But denying the power means the internal engine is entirely missing.
Right. The script is being treated as a cultural artifact rather than an ontologically disruptive force. It looks nice, but it doesn't actually do anything.
And when you hollow out the internal mechanics of a belief system and leave only that aesthetic shell, you create a really fragile sociological structure, which leads directly to the second piece of evidence.
The audit expands here, right?
It does. The prosecution moves from the internal psychological decay outlined in 2 Timothy to the external macro-level collapse described in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24.
Right, this is where the scope gets massive. Matthew 24, verses 6 through 12. This passage begins with your classic macro symptoms of apocalyptic literature. You know, wars, rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, famines, pestilences, earthquakes.
The big world-ending stuff.
Exactly. But then the audit quickly narrows back down from geopolitical chaos to microscopic relational breakdown.
This is the fascinating part.
The text warns that many will be offended, that they'll betray one another and hate one another. And it culminates with this haunting phrase, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold.
Waxing cold. If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a profound thermodynamic metaphor.
Oh, thermodynamic. I like that.
Yeah, it implies a previous state of warmth and fluidity that is slowly, perhaps imperceptibly, hardened into something stiff, brittle, and lifeless.
So it wasn't always cold, it waxed cold.
Exactly. In sociological terms, this perfectly describes the collapse of social trust. When a society experiences an overabundance of iniquity, which we can understand here as a systemic injustice, gross immorality, or that unchecked narcissism we were just talking about,
The social contract fractures.
it shatters.
Because the natural defense mechanism against a hyper-selfish society is to pull inward, right?
Yeah.
You stop trusting your neighbors, you become easily offended because you start perceiving everyone else as a threat to your individual autonomy.
And the warmth of communal obligation naturally waxes cold. You just freeze people out.
And the author's arguing that this relational deep freeze is the direct, inevitable result of abandoning the foundational script. But here's the thing. The true rhetorical hurdle the watcher faces isn't convincing the reader that the world is selfish or chaotic. I think most people would agree with that.
Right. We all see the chaos.
The real hurdle is overcoming the reader's baseline assumption that the world has always been this way.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why the third piece of evidence is so critical to their case.
Yeah.
The watcher actually anticipates the skepticism of the audience.
Okay, where do they go next?
They pull from 1 Timothy 4 and 2 Peter 3. These passages highlight the emergence of seducing spirits, doctrines of devils, and specifically, scoffers.
Scoffers. What do the scoffers say?
Well, the text says the scoffers will come and say, "Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation."
All things continue as they were. That attitude, it mirrors a concept in geology and philosophy known as uniformitarianism.
Uniformitarianism. That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's an important concept. It's basically the assumption that the same gradual, natural processes we observe today have always operated in the exact same way in the past.
So it rejects the idea of sudden cataclysmic shifts in favor of just a steady, predictable state.
Exactly. And the watcher is identifying and attacking a kind of spiritual uniformitarianism. The scoffers look at the narcissism, the geopolitical tension, the corporatization of the church we talked about, and they just normalize it.
They argue that humanity has always been flawed, empires have always fought, and religious institutions have always been somewhat corrupt.
Right. They use history to sedate their own anxiety. Oh, it's always been bad, so this isn't anything special.
It's the boiling frog syndrome applied to theology.
Yes, perfect analogy. If the water temperature increases incrementally, the frog never recognizes the terminal danger until it's too late.
And the watcher is essentially screaming that the water is boiling right now. The text demands that the reader stop looking at these verses as abstract poetry for some distant future and start treating them as a live, real-time toxicology report of the present moment.
And honestly, historically speaking, apocalyptic literature has always functioned this way.
Oh, definitely.
During the Black Plague, or the fall of the Roman Empire, or even the heights of the Cold War, humans have instinctively mapped their contemporary socio-political anxieties onto these ancient texts.
Because it provides a narrative structure to otherwise meaningless chaos. It makes you feel like someone is in control of the disaster.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What elevates the Watcher's use of this tactic is that they don't focus primarily on external enemies. Like, they aren't going after foreign empires or secular government.
No, not at all. The most brutal application of the evidence is aimed entirely internally.
And that is the ultimate twist of this forensic audit. You would assume the harshest penalties in a religious manifesto like this would be reserved for the active antagonists, right? The atheists, the secular humanists, the people who are out there actively mocking the script.
You would think so. But the watcher barely pays them any mind.
Barely mentions them. The absolute heaviest, most terrifying verdict is handed down to a demographic sitting comfortably inside the institution, the lukewarm.
Right. The prosecution enters Section 3 of the manifesto and turns its full focus to believers who are fully UTOs. They are intoxicated by the ambient culture, yet they firmly believe their salvation is secure because of some transactional moment in their past.
Like saying a prayer when they were a kid.
Exactly. The text explicitly mocks the idea that reciting a sinner's prayer in 1947 while continuing to live indistinguishably from the secular world, provides any legal standing before the auditor.
I found myself thinking of this dynamic like a massive high-end fitness club.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So you have millions of people who sign up for the membership, they pay their dues every month, they buy the heavily branded athletic wear, they slap the gym's decal on their car, and they fully integrate the identity of fitness enthusiast into their social media presence.
They're all in on the brand.
Totally. And they love the community aspect of the smoothie bar in the lobby, but, and here's the catch, they never actually step onto the gym floor. They refuse to lift a single weight. They never tear a muscle fiber, they never sweat, and they never experience the deep, uncomfortable physical breakdown that is biologically required for actual growth.
They want the aesthetic identity of the athlete without the agonizing mechanics of the training.
Exactly. They want kingdom benefits without the requirements of the cross. And your gym analogy, well, it actually scales perfectly to the institutional level, because the watcher doesn't just blame the individual for this apathy, they indict the management.
The management?
Yeah, the manifesto introduces this concept of hirelings.
Hirelings, right. Pastors and leaders who operate as hired hands rather than devoted shepherds.
Think about it. If the gym owner realizes that enforcing strict, grueling workout regimens causes people to cancel their memberships, what does the owner do?
They change the gym.
Right. They quietly remove the heavy weights and replace them with massage chairs and extra smoothie machines. Because the business model depends on retention, not transformation.
That makes perfect sense. The hirelings preach a sugar-coated gospel because demanding the actual requirements of the script, which involves profound sacrifice, self-denial, and friction with the broader culture,
Right.
well, that would decimate the stadium attendance numbers.
It is the ultimate merging of the holy with the profane. The sacred space becomes indistinguishable from a motivational seminar or, like, a social club.
And the verdict handed down for this specific type of spiritual consumerism is breathtakingly severe.
It really is. The watcher pulls from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, to read the final sentence on the lukewarm.
Let's hear it.
It says, I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth.
I will spew thee out of my mouth. Honestly, The use of biological rejection, literal vomiting as a metaphor for divine judgment, is arguably the most visceral image in the entire biblical canon.
It's disgusting, but it gets the point across.
It does. And in the legal framework of this manifesto, being skewed out is defined as a terminal rejection. It is a legal eviction. The contract is permanently voided.
The theological math here is what really requires some unpacking, I think, because the text says, "I would thou wert cold or hot." It is explicitly stating a preference for absolute freezing cold rejection over lukewarm participation.
Right.
It is saying that active, hostile atheism is somehow more palatable to the divine than half-hearted belief. Why is apathy treated as a higher form of treason than active rebellion?
Well, we have to look at the philosophy of commitment and what I would call the insult of trivialization.
The insult of trivialization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take any deeply committed relationship, marriage, for instance.
Okay.
Active conflict, even intense hostility, still acknowledges the profound weight of the bond. If a spouse angrily files for divorce, there is tragedy and pain, obviously, but there is also a grim respect for the reality of the situation.
Because they are treating the marriage as something significant enough to be angry about.
Exactly. The coldness is honest. It aligns the internal belief with the external action. The stakes are recognized by both parties, even in the destruction of the bond.
Okay, so that's being cold. What's being lukewarm in a marriage?
Consider a spouse who neither loves their partner nor leaves them. They remain in the house, utterly apathetic, treating their partner with the casual indifference one might afford a piece of furniture.
Ouch.
They keep the shared bank accounts. They show up for family photos to maintain social appearances, but the core of the relationship is just a void.
That is brutal.
And that lukewarm apathy is a much deeper insult. It degrades the very ontology of marriage. In the same way, the Watcher argues the active atheist at least treats the concept of God with enough intellectual respect to formally reject it.
Right.
The lukewarm believer, however, claims to recognize the sovereign creator of the universe and then treats that creator as a weekend hobby.
The trivialization is the crime. They are taking a script that centers on the torture and execution of a deity, a script that demands the total surrender of the human ego, and they are reducing it to a 45-minute entertainment block on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy is so structural, so deeply embedded, that the only biological response the text can imagine for the divine is physical nausea.
Vomiting, yeah. And with that horrifying verdict established, the auditor basically closes the ledger. The evidence of eutios is irrefutable. The scriptural markers align perfectly with the psychological decay of the culture, and the lukewarm are slated for terminal eviction.
So the rhetorical tension is at its absolute peak right here.
It is. And the text must now provide a mechanism for resolution. What happens next?
The Watcher pivots. They step out of the role of the prosecuting attorney to deliver an ultimatum, effectively cornering the reader. And the architecture of this final challenge relies on a fascinating piece of 17th century logic.
What's fascinating here is how the author structures the closing argument around a variation of Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager, break that down for us.
So Blaise Pascal was a French mathematician and philosopher. He lived in the 1600s. And he attempted to circumvent all the endless intellectual debates about the existence of God by framing belief as a pragmatic mathematical gamble.
Treating faith like a casino bet?
Essentially, yes. He posited that every human being is forced to place a wager with their life. You have to bet. If you bet that God exists and you live a life of devotion and you turn out to be right, the payoff is infinite, eternal life.
Infinite upside.
Right. But if you were wrong, your loss is finite and negligible. You just lived a disciplined life and then you die.
Not a bad deal.
Conversely, if you bet that God does not exist and you are right, your gain is finite. You get to live however you want for a few decades. But if you are wrong, your downside is infinite. Eternal separation.
Infinite downside.
Mathematically, the matrix dictates that the only rational bet is belief.
It's an elegant, if somewhat clinical, equation. And the Watcher takes Pascal's mathematical matrix and applies it directly to this mandate of sticking to the script. They present the reader with two stark scenarios.
Let's look at scenario A.
Okay, scenario A assumes the Watcher is completely wrong. Let's say the apocalyptic framing is totally hyperbolic, the forensic audit was just an overreaction, and the modern church's stadium marketing was actually perfectly fine all along.
Right, the Watcher is just a fanatic.
But despite the Watcher being wrong, the reader decides to heed the warning anyway. They abandon the sugar-coated theology and return to the raw, demanding discipline of the foundational text.
And the text asks, what is the actual downside in that scenario?
Right.
The Watcher points out that the reader loses nothing of value. They still secure their salvation, but they also gain immediate sociological benefits.
Like what?
Well, they cease to be a hypocrite, for one. They stop living with the cognitive dissonance of claiming a radical faith while living a comfortable secular life. They actually embody the script.
So the downside is zero, and the upside is profound personal integrity. I can see the appeal.
But then we arrive at scenario B.
The scary one.
What if the Watcher's right? What if the church is fundamentally intoxicated by UTOs? What if the lukewarm really are about to be legally evicted?
Oh boy.
If the reader ignores this manifesto, dismisses it as fanaticism, and continues to consume their spiritual placebos, they face the infinite downside. They lose their eternal standing. The text actually asks, straight up, are you really willing to gamble with your salvation?
Wow. Okay, but I have a question here. Philosophically, is this a theological plea or just a calculated gamble? Because this is where Pascal's wager faces its fiercest critique. And we have to apply that critique to the Watcher's ultimatum.
Right. Philosophers like William James argue that a faith born out of a mathematical risk-reward calculation is inherently mercenary.
Mercenary, yes. It reduces the profound mystical surrender of the soul to a mere fire insurance policy.
Exactly. If a person only sticks to the script because they are terrified of the infinite downside, their obedience is still rooted in self-preservation.
Meaning they are still, fundamentally, lovers of their own selves, which is the exact narcissism the text just condemned.
That is the exact paradox of the wager.
Right. If I'm only lifting the weights at the gym because someone is literally holding a gun to my head, I'm not actually a dedicated athlete. I'm just a hostage trying to survive. So doesn't making it a wager completely undermine the call for genuine, organic faith?
In a theological vacuum, yes. The mercenary nature of the wager is highly problematic. However, we have to view its deployment here as a triage tactic.
Triage, like in an emergency room.
Exactly. The Watcher operates from the premise that the house is currently on fire, and the occupants are heavily sedated by the strong delusion. When someone is completely intoxicated, you cannot reason with them using high-level philosophical nuances about the purity of organic faith.
They won't understand a word you're saying.
Right. You have to shock their system. The wager is a bucket of ice water designed to bypass the impaired logic centers of the brain and trigger a raw survival instinct.
Just to get them moving.
Exactly. The goal isn't to build a lifelong theology solely on fear. The goal is to break the paralysis of the delusion long enough for the person to step out of the burning building. Once they are outside, the genuine, non-mercenary faith can begin to take root.
A shock to the system. That makes a lot of sense. And once that ice water is thrown, the Watcher delivers the final, unavoidable instruction. They say, "The blood is off my hands. You have heard the word. You have seen the signs. There is no middle ground left."
There is no middle ground left.
That phrase is the executioner of the lukewarm. You cannot occupy the middle anymore. The mandate is total. Repent, take up the heavy, agonizing reality of the daily cross, and return to the raw, physical text. Stick to the script.
And it is here, at the very peak of this intense, terrifying, legally binding rhetorical storm, that the author executes this brilliant tonal shift.
Oh my goodness, the ending gave me absolute whiplash.
Me too.
After pages and pages of forensic audits, terminal evictions, and apocalyptic ultimatums, the Watcher simply writes, "Please bow your heads in prayer."
And then they just recite the Lord's Prayer.
Word for word.
Yeah. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It runs through the entire traditional recitation, ending quietly with, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen."
It is deeply disorienting.
It really is. We just spent an hour in a harsh, neon-lit interrogation room being yelled at by an auditor, and suddenly a door opens and we are kneeling on the stone floor of a quiet, ancient chapel, just asking for daily bread.
It is rhetorically jarring, I agree, but structurally it is a masterstroke. How so?
Well, think about it. If the document ended on the ultimatum, it would remain entirely within the realm of human argument and legalism. It would just be a guy yelling at you. But by ending with the Lord's Prayer, the exact prayer that the central figure of their faith handed to his disciples as a literal template, the Watcher transitions from prescribing the cure to actually demonstrating it.
They are quite literally sticking to the script.
Exactly. The author refuses the urge to write some soaring, dramatic, personalized closing prayer to showcase their own spiritual eloquence. They abandon their own voice entirely to use the foundational script.
And look at the content of that specific script. The Lord's Prayer is the absolute antithesis of the stadium marketing. The author spent the whole document dismantling.
It really is.
It is fiercely communal, right? It begins with our father completely dismantling the hyper-individualism of the narcissist.
Yes.
It asks only for basic, immediate sustenance, daily bread, which directly attacks the pursuit of financial windfalls and corporatized growth.
And crucially, it pleads for deliverance from evil.
Deliver us from evil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which directly acknowledges the ambient threat of the strong delusion and UTOs that the manifesto just diagnosed. It grounds all that soaring, terrifying, apocalyptic rhetoric in the quiet, desperate, daily reliance on the divine.
It's a really powerful ending, honestly. Let's pull the lens back a bit and synthesize this immense architecture we've just explored.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We have dismantled a manifesto that fundamentally rejects the modern therapeutic approach to religion. We've seen how the author weaponizes the sterile, punitive language of a forensic audit and medical malpractice to completely strip away the emotional insulation of the reader.
Right. We analyze that diagnosis of UTOs, the concept of ambient invisible intoxication, and how cognitive dissonance allows institutions to merge the sacred script with profane corporate metrics.
We examine the prosecution's evidence, mapping ancient warnings of psychological narcissism and the sociological collapse of trust onto our modern reality.
We confronted the terrifying legal eviction, awaiting the lukewarm, those who wear the aesthetic markers of the faith but refuse the mechanical burden of the script.
And we unpacked the calculated triage of that Pascal-style ultimatum, leading all the way to the quiet, structural fidelity of the Lord's Prayer.
The document is essentially designed to leave no psychological escape hatches.
None at all.
But I think the true utility of dissecting a text like this isn't merely academic. The psychological mechanisms it exposes are universal. It forces a profound mirror in front of the reader, regardless of their theological orientation.
And that is exactly where I want to leave this, because even if you strip away every theological assertion, every scriptural marker, and every apocalyptic warning from this document, the core diagnostic question remains fiercely relevant to every single person listening.
It's a question of integrity versus aesthetics.
Exactly. So think about it. In your own life, regarding your own core ethical beliefs, your philosophies, your commitments to your family or your community, are you operating a stadium marketing campaign?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Are you maintaining the external branding of a good person, a dedicated partner, a principled citizen, while internally denying the actual power and sacrifice those roles demand? Are you wearing the gym clothes without ever lifting the weights?
We really must ask ourselves if we are slowly being intoxicated by the ambient culture of self-preservation and convenience, and just allowing our deepest commitments to quietly wax cold.
Have we settled for a lukewarm, sugar-coated version of our own values simply because the raw foundational script of true integrity is just too heavy to carry?
It's a lot to chew on.
It is. The Watcher put the modern institution on trial and demanded forensic evidence of their faith. So I leave you with this final thought to carry with you today. Imagine that corporate auditor showing up at your door tomorrow morning.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. sharp. If they seized the hard drives of your actual life, your time allocation, your financial ledger, your private texts, the unseen mechanics of your relationships, and they laid all that raw data out under the harsh fluorescent lights of a courtroom, what would the evidence actually prove you were under the influence of? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it provided a rigorous, challenging framework for your own exploration. Until next time.